Assalamu alaikum, hello, and a special welcome to Miss Gail for joining us from Victoria, Australia, to share her wonderful experience that she has. I would be quickly going through her introduction just to give all of you an idea. Ms. Gail is currently working as Manager Organizational Transformation in the Department of Health and Human Services, Victoria, Australia. She has 35 years of experience in HR strategic alignment and capacity building. She has extensive experience in capacity building for Aboriginal communities and has also worked in private enterprises and universities and higher education providers. Ms. Gail has over 7 years of experience as coordinator for academic engagement and outcome for Aboriginal students at Monash University. She has been a strategic business partner at General Motors Holden, and she was looking after the whole transition of that company from a manufacturing company to a marketing and sales organization. And on top of it, Gail holds an MBA from Melbourne University and a bachelor's degree from Monash University. So Gail, I hope I have not missed any critical detail from your wonderful profile.
No, that's good, thanks.
All right, now it's up to you. You can start, please.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. It's an honour to do this. I've been heavily involved in the other side of academia, so not so much delivering lectures or anything, but supporting lecturers. So actually, yeah, thank you. It's an honour to be here. I thought I'd talk about organisational redesign, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards. I'm not going to go through the whole process with you because it would take hours, but just the main concept with organisational redesign, if you want to just pop the next slide up for me, Uma, is about what we've learned. Because since becoming a global economy and everything is interacted, that that term of business as usual, years ago businesses used to set a goal, they'd have a 10-year strategic plan and then they'd stick to that, and what was working was their business as usual and they'd continue to do that all the time. But now we're finding businesses need to adapt to meet changing demands, and sometimes something that's not even on the horizon comes up and a business needs to be able to transform quickly and agilely to meet those needs. And I guess in this term of this pandemic, there's nothing sort of has been more telling and showing than that in this global event. So we're finding now that enterprises, even small and medium enterprises, are needing to find new ways of working and to be able to evolve agilely to meet needs and to be a successful business. So if I can have the next slide. What happens, if you can just put it onto the next slide for me, what happens with a business is they would normally start with a business vision and an aspiration statement. So we're finding a business vision statement, it's really important that even a very small business, even if you've got 1 or 2 employees, it's really important that you have a vision. And the vision of your organisation is, what are you trying to achieve? Where are you now? Where do you want to be in a certain amount of time frame, and how are you going to get there? And that clear plan and that direction for the future is built in a business vision and an aspirational statement. So an idea of a business vision I've just popped up there is, to achieve the best outcomes, to provide quality products, to have the most modern opportunities, and to meet client needs. So when you have a business vision, it's really, really important that you share it with all your employees so that they know and they join the business, they join the vision as well for the business. The aspiration statement, we find if you're in a transformation process, is to work out, again, where you are, where you want to be and how you're going to get there, but also to have what is it that you want to be? So I know for us in the government, we want to be a learning organisation and we want to be able to translate evidence and listen to our client voices and better serve our clients. So that's our aspiration statement. If you're trying to do an element of transformation, even small, if you start with that aspiration statement, it's a really good place to start as far as being able to bring about a change and bring everyone on board. So if I can have the next slide. So once you have your statement and your vision statement and you know where you're wanting to be, what you're going to do is then work out how you're going to achieve those goals and how you're going to get there. Work out what tools you're going to use. And by tools, I mean things like software, capabilities, which human resources you're going to use, who are going to be your key players in this transformation, and then be really clear about the activities that you're wanting to complete. When you're using things like you're researching better ways of technology and you're looking at things that are going to do that, don't only commit to short-term solutions. And the reason I say that is that things will evolve really quickly. And sometimes you think, okay, what we need to do is get everyone on this system, and then something will happen and you'll need to make a change. So try to have as flexible an approach to the transformation that you have. So the next point that I made was to use a project control group. And what a project control group is when you have a transformation, you bring in 5 or 6 key players that are going to be your people, that your champions of change, and your people that are going to do that, and meet regularly, so once a week or once a fortnight or once a month, depending on how rapidly you want to change. And that project control group is going to be pivotal to that. So, and I'll give you an example of that. When I was at Holden, we went from, the federal government announced that they were no longer going to support and prop up the car manufacturing industry in Australia. So they made this announcement, and then overnight, we realised that we were going to go from being a manufacturing company that made engines and cars and parts to being a marketing company. So we knew that essentially we were going to sell cars that were made in other parts of the world coming into Australia, and that's what we would do. But at that point in time, we had 2 fully functioning factories, one in Melbourne and one in Adelaide in South Australia. And we were also manufacturing engines to all parts of the world. So we were exporting engines to Brazil and to the US. And we were also exporting a lot of our technology as far as design. So General Motors Holden Australia was designing a lot of the cars that were being produced in Europe and in America. So we knew that that was going to go. So once we knew that, our project control group, we knew that we would have to be all the minds that would pull that together. So we needed to have someone from our engineering team, someone from our HR team, someone from General Motors parent company in the US, and then obviously our HR strategy people were sitting there, and our CEO. And that project control group met weekly for the first 6 weeks of that project to work out who we would have to interact with, who our stakeholders were going to be, and what we were going to do. We also knew that we had a very highly unionised workforce, and they were not going to be happy with this announcement. So we would have to do things that would help soften the blow for the people that were going to be directly affected by this decision. And our main people that were affected were our workforce. So our people that were our plant manufacturing people, our people that were working on our assembly lines in the factories, in those 2 factories, but also our other key stakeholders were our smaller producers. So the people that produced a lot of the components for our cars that were manufactured in Australia. So our glass, our windshield manufacturers, the people that made the seatbelt buckles. There were lots and lots of smaller players in this market, and we knew that with us withdrawing from that market, we were essentially going to send them out of business as well. So one of the things that Holden did do there to help and assist with what we knew would create massive unemployment in certain areas and create an absolute void for people to work. So we worked with the Australian government, and the Australian government put $15 million into what it called was a growth fund. And that allowed people to retrain and upskill and go to another area of expertise. So what we did as a company was have one-on-one meetings with every factory worker. And you had to understand that a lot of our factory workers had only worked on a production line in manufacturing for their entire life. A lot of our factory workers were, say, 50, and they'd started with Holden when they were 16, and they'd only worked on our assembly line. So we knew that we would have to support them through making a transition into another career. So the growth fund that we had through the government, we used to allow people to go back to a technical, to a TAFE or to a learning institution to learn a new skill. And then we supported them by helping make resumes, by doing recruitment activities, and helped like doing interview techniques and those sort of things one-on-one with each of the 6,000 employees that were going to lose their job. The other thing we did was also work with those smaller manufacturing companies that we knew would essentially not be making windscreens for us, or not be making seatbelt buckles or water bottles or those things for us anymore, and seeing if there were alternate industries that they could connect with that would then help with them. So a lot of the capability we did was around trying to find an alternate product for them to manufacture or something else for them to do. So if you go to the next plan, the next slide is about, so we worked out essentially with our project control group what we were going to do, and we could be quite open and honest and brutal in those organised meetings. But then what we knew we needed to clearly communicate that to our staff, to our people that were affected, and to all our stakeholders. And what we had to do was to share our vision of transformation, to tell the story of why, and to try and bring those stakeholders on that journey with us. The one thing we needed, that we knew we would need, was to be able to clearly communicate that and to build trust. We had to be really careful not to break what's called a psychological contract, and that's a contract that exists with an employer and an employee. And that's kind of, when you employ someone, that contract, that psychological contract, is what they think they're going to get from us and what we think we're going to get from the employee. And so we had to be really careful that we still met those needs. So we had to be really clear, open, and honest in the way that we communicated. And one of the key things that we had to have was a two-way communication. So we had to have sessions where we could give information, but then also be prepared to stand there and to receive feedback, to answer questions until there were no more questions in the room, and to allay a lot of the fear and anxiety that we knew that this transition would bring up. So one of the things that we found really useful at Holden, and also again in the communication that we're doing now, is about sharing our timelines, sharing all our communication, and having lots of different ways of communication, not just saying we send an email once a week, but we have to have lots of different comms. So our communications plan has to involve things like forums, like areas where we can stand and ask and have questions, areas where people can ask questions, and different formats of questions. So people could ask questions through a notice board, or through an online forum, or through a face-to-face meeting. And then we had to be available to address communications. Just the next slide. So the key thing that you have to do when you are doing a communication plan is then checking in and making sure that your message is landing and that people are understanding what you're trying to do. And the best way we can do that is something like a pulse survey. And we've done that at Holden, and we're also doing that at DHS at the moment. And a pulse survey is just a really quick 5-minute, every employee gets sent out, and they get sent a link, and they ask to click, and it's how are you feeling? Are you understanding what's going on? You design the survey around what you want to achieve. So if at the moment, when we were in Holden, what we wanted to know was that our employees were okay, that their mental health was being looked after, that the anxiety around the transition was being allayed, and that people felt that they were supported and that they were being able to give opportunities to find alternate employment. And what we did with that information is, so when people were feeling that they weren't supported, we would have to then change our messaging, or we would have to change what we were doing. If at one point in the transition, a lot of the people that were filling in the survey were saying that they didn't feel supported, that they didn't feel that they were able to take up employment somewhere else, that they didn't understand the packages that were being offered as far as redundancy. So we knew that we had to do a better way of messaging. And it was with those surveys that helped bring that up. Had we not done that, we would have continued to go with our communication plan, and we knew that we wouldn't know that it wasn't landing. So one thing I will say, if you are doing change or you are presenting information to a group, an employee, and you are in that space, the best thing to do is to check in with your employees, and to check in a way that allows your employees to come back and ask you questions or to clarify what the message is. I know when I was in that space, I'd write a slide and I think, this makes perfect sense, and these guys are going to know exactly what I want. And then I'd get a question and I'd be like, wow, I didn't say that. So that's where it's really, really important to make sure that you're getting that two-way communication, and that you're inviting the feedback back, um, and that you're making sure that the message that you're delivering always is along the lines of the communications plan and what you want to achieve. So the next slide is just, so we were downsizing. I guess this is I've done different levels of transformation, and sometimes they're good, they're upsizing, and we're building. So I worked at Optus Communications when it first started, and that was a good message. That was we're upsizing, we're employing, we've got long-term roles. This was in the 90s. At Holden, it was a very different message. We were downsizing. We didn't have a job for 6,000 people, and they had to find an alternate arrangement. We would pay out a redundancy payment, but we had to negotiate early. So I'm saying, if you are in a space where you are managing downsizing and you are doing that change, best advice is to be open, honest, and transparent with employees. Don't lie, don't pretend something's better than it is, and don't call it anything other than it is. We were offering redundancies, and we did that openly and transparently. The reason Holden had so much success and so very little fallout with all of that is that we negotiated early with a highly unionised workforce, and that our staff and employee groups were engaged and taken along the journey all the way. We had someone from the union sit on our project control group, and so we were very transparent with what we were doing. The other thing that we did do really well was offering a health and well-being for our employees. We're offering assistance that was appropriate, so employment services, retraining services, funding to do upskilling and to do other things, and most importantly, an employee assistance program. And in Australia, most companies do have what's called an EAP, an employee assistance program. And the reason we negotiated and heavily offered counselling and services around mental health was because this was a really confronting change. Um, and to give you some background, Holden has been it's an iconic Australian brand. If you think of Australia and someone said, you name an Australian car, people would go Holden or Ford. There's only two, and it was such a tight brand, held so tightly to the hearts of Australian people. And most people who worked at Holden proudly said, if you introduce yourself, hi, I'm Gail and I work for Holden. It was like, such a tight brand. So we had to be really aware of the mental health of our employees and people that we were asking to not work for Holden anymore and to take away part of their identity. So the other thing that we had to be really careful was, because this change happened over 2 years, was a thing that we referred to as change fatigue. And it's where people were just sick to death of things not being the same, of coming in and going, oh, what's changed now? And so you need to be really careful that you're managing that change fatigue, and that you're helping people to because we still needed people to make cars. So for that 2 years, we were telling them, at the end of 2 years, you're not going to have a job and we don't want you anymore. But right now, we want you to work really hard and build fantastic cars. And so it was kind of managing that message and letting people know that they were still valued and still cared about, but that you know, this was going to happen, and we knew that people were getting fatigued. So a lot of things that we did around, from a HR point of view, were around managing that fatigue and helping people to feel good about still coming into work. And as we downsized, and as those last couple of months came in and people would come to work, and we'd have a shift of 200 people, and then it would go to 150, and then it would go to 100, and then it went to 50. There was almost a feeling of survivor guilt as well. And so we were trying to manage that as well, to just make people still be productive and engaged as employees, but still aware and being very honest about what was going on there. So I put there, one of the things that we did was negotiate with stakeholders, unions, employee groups, clients, customers, and ultimately the government, because we knew that all the changes that we did were affecting entire suburbs and entire groups of people, and in a lot of cases, families. We had several hundred people who, the father, the son, and the grandson were all working at Holden, and so it was a real family thing. So we had to be aware that we were affecting community as well. So a lot of our messaging and a lot of our peripheral work that we did was also in the communities, particularly in Elizabeth in South Australia, because it's a community where Holden is probably the only employer. So we knew that when Holden left, that there would be a whole lot of communities where unemployment was just going to rise exponentially. So we did a whole lot of work around helping to build the capacity of the community as well as we were exiting there. Just the other slide, I think. So, and that's kind of from a people point of view. The other thing that when you are doing a reporting and a organisational change is, and this is really critical to the success if you're going to come out of this at the end of that journey where we are, where we want to be. This is the how we're going to get there, is reporting and scorecards. So, and by reporting that, I mean a regular update of the activity and monitoring the progress. So the things that you're wanting to monitor are the people side of it, how well, who's interacting, who's engaging with you, how many people are turning up to your forums, those sort of things. But you'll also need to monitor the activity of the business as it's changing. So for Holden, what we had to manage were how many people had left, how many cars were still being built, what targets we were still meeting, if we were still relevant in the market, if we were still producing what we needed to. And then obviously you're looking at your financial transactions and things as well. It's really important that all of those things are reported as a whole. And we used to report them as a scorecard once a week so that our managers knew exactly where they were and exactly what they had to do, and they were able to do that. We used to share that with our stakeholders as well. And the reason you do that is so that they continue to stay on the journey with you as well. And it also increases engagement, and it ensures that your project is completed. So I'd say reporting is probably one of the most important things to do. And just with the last slide was just about risk and responsibility. So one of the things that we always do before we start any major transformation, be it an increase like we did at Optus, or a downsize like we did at Holden, or even like what we're doing at DHS at the moment, which is just altering the way we work, is to make sure that you capture your risks and that you manage them. So sometimes you'll have a risk, and the risk will be that we might get negative media, or that we might lose sales. I know with Holden, the risks that we had were that we would drop in the market, in our sales market, in our sales of new cars, because of our image being damaged because of changing and not offering employment there anymore. So there are some risks that you need to note, and you're going to have them, and you just need to mitigate them as much as you can. And then sometimes there are risks that become huge issues, and then you need to be able to manage not only the risk but the issue it's become. And an example of that was sort of, as I said before, the mental health and the change fatigue of the employees that were still working for us. And it was at that stage that we then decided to change and bring in programs to assist employees. So the importance of having a risk and a issues register is that you can track things as they're coming and you can address them as they come up. And being able to do that enables you to respond. And the more actively and quickly you can respond to an issue, the less likely it is to then become something that becomes a full-blown problem within your transformation. So that's kind of a step-by-step, and it's a very, very quick overview. And I suppose in your learning and being at uni, you would have learned a lot of the theory behind it. But yeah, when you're in the real life of doing a transformation, I guess some of the main things are to try and not to hold that theory because those theories work, but to also remember that you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people's lives and you're dealing with their livelihoods. And it's knowing that, and that will make you a successful transformation. And as an organization, and we always say that here, if we can get the people side of this right, the business side of it will look after itself, because your people will look after your business. So sometimes it's easy to say, oh, we have to downsize, we need to get rid of so many employees, and that'll be easy. But actually going through those steps and making sure you do those comms and looking after your people is what will ultimately bring you the success. So that was really all I was going to tell you. I hope that's been useful, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to talk about my experience of doing those transformations if you have any questions.
Yeah, it was really wonderful of you to share the whole transformation procedure that you supervised in General Motor Holden. I mean, even as a teacher, I was able to write down so many valuable points.
Thank you.
So before I ask you something, or before I initiate, I would encourage the students, if you want to ask Gail anything, please raise your hand and you can do that. Really looking forward to this, because this interaction is for you all. So anyone? Dr. Kashif, can you hear us? All right. So in the
yes,
sir, Gail, Dr. Kashif is our head of department at our business program. Sir, please.
Welcome, Miss Gail Lister.
Thank
you very much for providing us an opportunity to listen to you. I have been listening to it, I think since the start of this presentation you made, you enlightened us with your experience about transformation and vision and mission, and about your experience. We are grateful to you. And I am also grateful to Umar, who has in fact kind of provided us an opportunity. Now I have a very small for my own understanding. Now when the organizations are experiencing transformation, their vision and mission statements, they are not, with the passage of time, they require realignment.
Yes.
Realignment of operations by taking into account, or realignment of vision and mission by looking at the operations of the organization. We would like to know if you can kindly shed some light upon this mechanism. How does this work? And how does it work generally, and how, if you can share us with any of your experience that in the past, that how practically the organizations have done and managed their vision and mission, aligned their vision and mission. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So when I was at Holden, our mission and vision used to be, we wanted to be the premier car manufacturer of Australia. It was all about brand recognition. Our vision, our mission, and everything was all about, we build cars in Australia, we build the best cars for Australian conditions. We are the Australian car manufacturer for Australia. And then what happened, obviously our our government pulled that funding, and then we knew that we weren't going to be that. That wasn't going to be us. And so our mission then came that we wanted to be the best sales company offering the best customer service. So we went from being a company that made something that someone else sold for us to being a company that we now, what Holden wanted to be was then the best customer service, offering the best value for money, offering the best way for people to achieve their goal of owning a car. And so a lot of how that mission statement came about and how we changed that was getting our senior executive. So we had our CEO and our CFO and the 9 executives that sit across Australia all in one room, all talking about what they wanted to achieve. So we had our marketing manager there as well. And obviously as a HR strategy, we had the 2 people in my team that come in there and sit in that as well. And from there, we talked about what we wanted to be and who we wanted to be and what our mission statement wanted to be. And over the course of a day, part of that was developing that mission statement. And then the main thing that came out of that and what was really important was then socializing that mission statement with all our employees. And as I said, it was that fine line between making sure it landed. So with our factory workers who've always been like, yeah, our mission is to make the best cars. And then suddenly it's, yeah, you're not in our mission anymore. So, you know, they're still in employment, still a pivotal part of our organization, but not part of our vision. And so it was just managing that as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
A student has a question. Registration number 10. I cannot see your names right now, so if you can start the question with stating your name, please.
Hello, Gail. It's Barira. It was wonderful listening to you. My question is that whenever there's a change in an organization, there are always people who are resisting the change for several reasons. It could be the fear of loss or the unknown, or they just don't want to leave their comfort zones. So how to overcome that resistance to make the organizational change successful? Should you be coercive at some point?
No, so yeah, it's a great question. And it is one of the main things you will find. You will always have in any organization, big or small, people who are completely resistant to change. One thing that we've found that works really well, what we're doing in DHS at the moment, is having a change champion in each of the areas. So we're bringing out a change across essentially an organisation that employs 10,000 people. So we know we're going to have a lot of resistance. And because we're a government employment, we're very secure and everyone has this long, stable relationship with their employer. So what we did was we asked an executive in every area of the department to be our change champion. And we tried to pick executives that were popular, charismatic, and that people wanted to follow. A lot of our leaders have that natural leadership. So in a couple of areas, our change champion wasn't necessarily our most important executive or our most important person, but was our most charismatic or so the most well-liked of the executive team. And we get them to champion the change and to bring the ideas around and to do that. And we find that that works a lot better. We tend to use a lot of a statement is that carrots work better than sticks. So we tend to find that motivating and getting people to change because it's trendy or because it's what the popular executive is doing is a lot easier way than forcing people to do something they don't like. On the same token, we also spend a lot of time helping people to ask questions and to understand what's going on. Most people, when you really unpack a change resistance with them, they're frightened or they have a fear of the change. So if you can allay that fear and you can do that with open and clear and honest communication and transparent telling the truth, you'll find that that actually gets rid of a lot of the resistance to change as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for responding. Registration number 34, please start by stating your name and then you can ask your question, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Abi Fatma and Ma'am Gail, it's a pleasure having you here. I think the organizational change is a complex phenomenon with potentially devastating consequences if not done correctly. Either it's a stable change or a dynamic change. The response to the stimuli is not always predictable. I just wanted to ask, what are the common pitfalls or the difficulties when implementing an organizational change? You talked about the mental health, the external and the internal factors that affect the scenario you're working in. How can you maintain that positivity around?
Yeah, and that's a great question too, and it is probably one of the hardest things. I used to a little bit of my role was actually advising people when their last day would be, and what was really awful, I sort of had this nickname as the Terminator. It was awful, and and in my office every week, my executive assistant used to deliver a carton of tissues in small boxes because I would deliver that and people would cry in your office. And like I said, the change is not this great, exciting thing. Like, it was absolutely gut wrenching, a lot of that. But when managed well and offering people that support, and being able to tell the truth and being able to be there and be supportive, it was actually it was an honor to do a lot of that work as well, to be able to help people to choose different careers. And also said it, so there was that part of it, and it was awful. The upside of it was quite good as well. So I'm still in contact with a lot of the people that work there. I worked at Holden for a very long time, and so you get to know all the factory workers, especially when you're in HR. You get to know everybody who is in there, and it's bringing yourself to there. But two of the young engineers that were working for Holden have started their own business and are making little toy go-kart sort of things, because they're having a very, very successful business, and they would never have done that had Holden not transformed. They have an incredibly successful business and have made a lot of money out of that. I know a lot of the people that they're when I was in charge of that program of redoing that, we had a 70% success rate. So that meant that 70% of the people that we made redundant on the day they were redundant had another job to go to. So we actually achieved what we needed to achieve and got rid of that risk of high unemployment by interacting really well. So whilst change is difficult and it isn't exciting and it is very hard to stay positive, I think if you tell those big stories of the wins of, what went right, and I think for the reason we had such a high re-employment rate for people was because we were able to tell those stories. So on our notice board, we were putting up photos of staff within there that had secured another role and what they were doing and how they'd done that and how their retraining had worked. And so I think pivotal to the change and pivotal to the success of the transformation is being able to tell the story in a human level as well, not just so when we would stand up and give our weekly address from human resources, I didn't stand up and say we've saved 60% this week and we've put an extra $1,000 in the bank. That wasn't our message. Our message was that 5 people had secured employment, that people were able to, we told the success stories from a personal point of view. And I think that's what helps you stay positive in those times.
Such a wonderful response. I mean, having the human element in everything that you do, caring for them, even if you have to let them go, still caring for them and deciding on behalf of them, that is something that takes a lot of guts and effort. Thank you for the question, G. Anyone else? G, we have registration number 27. Please start with your name and you can ask your question, please.
Hello, Gail. It's an honor to have you here. The question that I want to ask is that, as you told that you're downsizing a lot of people these days. So what keeps the other employees motivated? Because people are in the fear that they're being downsized and how would they work with the proper motivation? What is your thing on?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And as I said, it's a twofold problem. So we have a problem of people have survivor guilt, and that's where they haven't lost their job, but everyone else in their team has. And then it's almost like you feel guilty for not being the person that's finished. But also you then start thinking, why do I want to work for this organisation? They've just got rid of 6 of my workmates, or, you know. So what you have to do when you're doing transformation and you are downsizing, again, it's about bringing that human element in and telling that story. So saying to people, a lot of what we're doing in Department of Health and Human Services now is about downsizing, but we're not making anyone redundant, and we're not sacking anybody. What we're doing is actually, as people naturally, what's called natural attrition, when someone naturally leaves the business for another promotion or a different job, or for whatever reason that they leave the organisation, we actually don't fill their position. And then what we have is a mobility pool, so people can register, current employees can register with that. And as a position becomes available, we allow those people to apply for a job within the thing. So where we've identified that someone may actually, that job would potentially go and isn't required anymore, we know that we've had a natural attrition in another area, and it's about moving the employee in there. So to tell that story and to let people know who work for your company that that's what we're doing, that no one is going to be forced out, that, yeah, we are going to shrink as an organisation, and within 2 years we are going to have, for example, 1,000 less employees that we have now, but we're not going to make anyone leave, and everyone is secure. And so giving people that sense of security and that sense of belonging and being engaged with the employer actually helps you to retain the staff that you want to retain. And then it also makes people not feel that they've been pushed out. It's probably a kinder way of doing a redundancy. But I will talk about just briefly, when I was at Optus, at one stage there we had a natural downturn, and the company was purchased by Singtel, which is a Singapore company. And so we went from being an Australian-owned company to being owned by a Singapore company, and they were very much bottom line, bottom dollar, a company that was very much about the dollar. And for the employees that were there, we had a round of redundancies where they did actually make 600 people redundant in 1 week, and there was no notice given or anything. It wasn't done well. But the challenge then, the challenge for us in the HR department there was engaging the people that were left and building that trust that they wouldn't be next. And it was a matter for us of feeding back to the management that this isn't the way it's done in Australia, I guess. And it's probably one of the key things with having a global business compared to a local business, where and I remember sitting in a meeting saying that would never happen had we not been owned by a company that was so focused on the dollar. And it was a foreign concept, but what we needed to do, and we knew we needed to do, was build back brand trust with the people that were left. And yeah, it is a challenge, and it's very hard, and it took a very long time to create that trust. And we actually probably lost a lot of really key staff who resigned over that decision just because of how it was done. So.
All right. Just to ask Gail, we have few questions lined up. It totally depends how comfortable you are. How much time do you have?
Yeah, I'm okay if you, yeah.
All right.
You need to go.
Just few minutes more. All right, G, registration number 10. G, please start with your name and you can ask your question.
This is Vaira again. You mentioned change fatigue. I read in a Harvard Business Review that a good way to overcome is that through quick wins. That increases the morale of the employees. So can you give an example of quick wins in your organization?
Give you one from today, actually. So no, I'll go back and find something else for you as well. But we've had people in lockdown here in Australia since the 8th of March. Our team has been, and we've run a pulse survey. We got the results back today, and I sat in with the executive this afternoon, and we were looking at those results. And we've gone from being not too bad to having a lot of very, very unhappy employees, just because of, I think they're mentally sick of COVID. We've had enough. We're mentally sick of being locked down. And at the moment, we're also doing a transformation program as well. So we're undergoing downsize and an alternate response. So our employees, particularly in the transformation team, have absolutely what we would call change fatigue. So this afternoon we organised, everybody tomorrow will, in our team, will actually get a parcel from the OT team, from the management team, thanking them for the work. There's a letter from our director that thanks them for their work, saying that, and it's also just got a box of chocolates and a face mask, but like a beauty face mask that, you know, that's a joke on our having to wear a face mask, and then also a tea bag so that people, it's always like, you know, drink tea and soldier on. But we know that will hit a market and be really well received, because it's something. So we, at the moment, as an executive, we can't change what's happening. There's nothing I can put in place. There's no strategy. There's no HR thing that I can put in place that will allow people to freely walk around, go outside, be free of a virus that may kill them, and help with that. We have nothing for that. But what we can do is help our employees feel better. So that's one way of doing it. At Holden, when we had a series of change fatigue, and we knew we had that sort of midway through the redundancies happening and the production scaling down, and we were running at about half capacity. And what we found was that it was quite distressing for our manufacturing teams to be coming into a half factory every day. So there was only half the amount of workers, and we used to run a night shift and a day shift. So what we did was we closed our night shift and brought all our night employees onto the day and just ran one shift instead. And that actually boosted morale, because we then went to having a full capacity factory again rather than a half one. And it was kind of like you could look around the factory and there weren't all these empty gaps of people that were missing. The other thing that we did was we started doing having social functions. So we started having barbecues on a Friday for lunch and providing that for the teams that were working in there, and allowing them, instead of a 40-minute lunch break, which was a really tight and strict because of the manufacturing, we went to having a 2-hour lunch break on a Friday. And that was just to allow people to chat, to talk. We used to have someone from our employee assistance program there as well, and we would have counsellors there as well, so people could take it. And our HR team they had to be there for that. And that, so it was twofold: being able to talk, being able to remove the daily visual of having gaps, and then also being able to allow people to express their feelings, and that helps with change fatigue. So sometimes it's not a business thing, and it's not something that will save you money. It's just a personal touch to helping people to cope.
Thank you, Gail, for sharing. I think just 2 more questions to go, so we'll be winding up. I mean, it's totally up to you. Registration number 25, G, if you can ask your question.
Yes, sir. Hello, Gail. This is Aisha here, and it's an honor to have you here, and thanks a lot for such a wonderful explanation. So I would like to ask you that how have you handled working under someone you felt was not good at communicating? How did you deal with that?
It happens all the time. So I often, probably one of the best things I do is when I first start working with someone, I will try and unpack their communication style and share mine with them. I'm a reasonably open person, so that I will tend to point something out if it's not making sense for me. I find, I guess, this probably been my message all along, telling the truth is the best way to do something. I've sat in meetings where I've had senior executives explain something to me, and I've gone, "Whoa, that I got nothing." So, but that's not how you say it back. Like, I would often then take the time to go back and talk to a manager and say, "Look, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you meant here, and can you explain it further to me?" And I've found that often with communicating, sometimes you have to try different things. So in this pandemic world that we're finding, where people are having to be online, we're finding it's very difficult and quite hard, because you don't get the body language that you normally would get in a conversation, and you're not getting the they say communication is 90% non-verbal, and all you're getting on a lot of these Skype calls and things is just the words. And so finding different ways to communicate, finding different ways to express what you're doing and what you're saying. I'll find sometimes I'll send an email and then I might read it back and think, well, that might not have landed where it needs to be. So it needs a phone call to follow up as well. Or so just finding different channels, like a text, an email, there's all these different ways of communicating. And communication's a skill, just like anything else. It's not something people are naturally born with. It's something you need to learn, and it's something you need to work on. And so often I'll find if I'm having trouble communicating with someone and I'm having trouble building a relationship with them, I'll stop and I will ask a question halfway through. I'll be like, so did you understand what I meant by that? Or what do you think of that? Or what's your answer? Or do you have any response to what I've just said? And that often will help people unpack what you're saying, but also help them try and understand and make sure that it's worked well. I can guarantee you, as students just coming out of uni, you will work with people you despise. You will work with people you admire. You will work with people that you cannot even bear to be in the same room as. And you will do it because it's what we do. The world is made up of people from everything from all diverse groups. The more diverse your team is and the more different personalities that come in and the more different ideas you get, you will find the more dynamic it is. I've worked with people that I couldn't stand, but I learnt so much from them, and having them challenge my view or having them challenge the way I think or having them respond differently to how I would normally think and make me change a point of view has been really good. And it actually means that it rounds you as a person and it enables you to think differently, and to have your beliefs challenged sometimes is actually not a bad thing. So
That is such a wonderful, wonderful advice. I mean, Simran Ji, do you have a question? We have one chance of one final question. Simran Ji.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Good evening, Gail. My name is Simran. I really appreciate you taking out time for us all. You mentioned that if we take care of the people side of the organization, the business will be taken care of. That really stuck with me. My question is that how will you find the balance in implying a strategy on the organization as a whole? Because every employee is different from one another. What may be a positive indicator for one can be a negative indicator for the other employee.
yeah, and that's very true. And I think when you're developing your strategy and you're realizing, and I know in Australia we have a very multicultural community. Like most most people you'll find are from another country or from another culture, and so because we have that blend, it's this really fine balance of trying to find a program within what we're doing, or a strategy that's going to work for the majority and actually not disadvantage anybody. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not something that there's not just one, oh, you do this and it works. But what I've found is responding well to things like a pulse survey. So if you bring something in and you're not sure how it's going to land and you're not sure that it's going to actually be suitable for people, asking that question in a pulse survey. We've done things in the last couple of weeks where we've asked, the questions that we've asked have been things like, do you have the chair that you need to sit on at home? Do you have an ergonomic chair? Do you have the equipment that you need to do your job? Are you happy with your manager and the amount of communication you're having? And then when you get those answers back, what's really important is then responding. So even if you just have one person that's incredibly unhappy, you still need to respond. As a HR strategist, you can't come into an executive meeting and say 80% of our employees are happy, so we're good. You actually, even when you have 2 or 3 that aren't right, you need to address those problems, and there won't be one solution. You'll find when you are preparing strategies that often, like your lecturer said right at the start, your mission statement will change, your vision statement will change, and absolutely your strategy will change. And if you are good and you are responsive, it should be changing. people who have 10-year-old mission statements have 10-year-old businesses. And, you know, that's responsiveness and within reason. You know, like, I know that I could make everyone in my department happy by giving them a 20% pay rise and knocking off 3 days a week early, but that's not going to happen. So what we need to do is be able to achieve something that gives us a good business background and a good understanding of what the business requires, but also that looks after our people.
Thank you so much.
One final question. Abir.
I just have a question that we get to hear so many causes and reasons for the need to change. I mean, apart from survival that results in an organization's need to change, what are the other reasons? And can these be generalized for all the organizations, or they vary from an organization to organization?
Some of the biggest changes are interruptions to a marketplace. So you'll find if you own a hotel or a hotel chain at the moment, you've got what's called an interruption, and that interruption is Airbnb, or, you know, people putting their own little apartment up for overnight stays or those sort of things. So interruptions to the telecommunications industry, for example, are things like a new mobile phone coming out. So when I worked at Optus, everyone had the old Philips phones. You're far too young to remember any of this, but everyone had these old phones, and then suddenly Apple brought in this phone that had a screen and it could connect to the internet. And it was an absolute interruption to how we did business as a telecommunications company, because for the first time we had to offer data plans that people could embrace, because we knew people were going to embrace this technology, and if we didn't come along for the ride, we wouldn't. So those sort of interrupters, they're things that create a need to change. Then you have external forces like Holden had, where the government just said, we're pulling the pin, we're not funding this anymore, you're done. And you have to change because you have no choice. And then I guess one of the other big reasons to change is sometimes your organisation's just too big and too bulky, and it's not doing what it needs to do. So, for example, where I am at the moment in department, we've had people sitting in the same job for 15, 20 years doing the same thing. So we're not learning as an organisation. So we're not responding better because we're just doing the things that we were doing 20 years ago. So that's the other big need to change, is sometimes it's not change for change's sake, but sometimes there's a need to change just because there are ways of doing things better. You know, if as an organisation 20 years ago, if you just said, no, we're not going to email, we are still going to do everything by fax, people would look at you as an organisation and say, well, what are you doing? You know, this is so much more efficient. And even 2 years ago, when the transformation team first started within DHS, one of the things that they brought in, luckily for us, was this Teams, you know, the Microsoft Teams, and having team meetings and that. And I know 2 years ago, I used to drive to Ballarat, which is a city just outside of Melbourne. It used to take me 2 hours, and I used to drive there once a week. I used to drive to Geelong, which is another hour out of Melbourne. I used to go there once a week to meet with my team and to also have meetings, regular meetings with other people. So those were my meeting days. And the thought of doing that now, even just 18 months later in the middle of a pandemic, is ridiculous. I think you know, as an organisation, that need to change is there. Like driving a car for 2 hours there and then 2 hours home to have a 1 hour meeting that could be done online. You know, so sometimes the things that make you change are economic, and then sometimes they just make sense and they look after employees better. It's from a personal point of view, it's much better for me not to be in the car for 4 hours a week driving, and it's 4 hours of work of doing something else, of productivity that the business loses. And the other reason organisations change is sometimes the demand for their product just goes. And Nokia is a classic example of that. You know, I don't think anybody has a Nokia phone, yet in 1994, 96% of the world who had mobile phone users were Nokia users. So that's an example of a company that didn't change. They didn't evolve. They didn't put a screen on their phone, and they didn't connect to the internet for a long time. And doing that, so sometimes the risk of not transforming and not doing change is actually risks your entire business. So as I said at the start, that idea of being able to just sit there and just business as usual, I'll just do the same thing. And even in little places like restaurants, like a little restaurant owned by mum and dad, like a mum and dad restaurant doing that, even they need to change and evolve their menu and evolve and respond to the changing world outside. Nowhere near as rapidly as a telco communication or something, but even they will benefit from changing, from putting a new menu in sometimes, or putting new tablecloths in, on those things. So change needs to be seen as a good and positive thing rather than a something to be scared of.
That's so wonderful of you to share. I just wanted to ask Gail, being a kind-hearted person and being someone who cares for the employees, how do you start that conversation when you are about to lay them off? When they enter your room, you know that. How do you start it?
Well, I think, sincerely, a lot of what I would do is thank people for their service, and then to absolutely explain that this is not a personal decision, that if we had ongoing funding and limitless funds, and if there wasn't an interruption to a business, that this wouldn't be changing. And I think what's really important, the message you need to give to someone when you do make them redundant, that it is not about their performance and it is not about them as a person. So, and that is clearly something you need to continually reiterate. And, because people, they leave and they've lost their job, and the difference between being made redundant and being dismissed for a misconduct is very different. And so being able to clearly identify that, this is a business decision, this has nothing to do with your performance, and to thank people for the service that they've given the company, and to let them know that their contribution to the company at the time was well regarded and well received. And I think for me, the other thing was being in a position to able to offer people the post support, the support once all that finished, and being able to help and assist with further employment opportunities, give references, being able to help with employment was incredibly important too. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think that is clearly the message, because what you don't want is for someone to leave in the middle of an economic downturn or whatever, feeling like it's something they could have done differently to maintain their employment. It's about being honest about why and what happened.
Such a wonderful advice. Thank you so much, Gail, once again for joining, for sharing. It was like a crash course of strategic leadership, strategic HR, change management, organizational transformation. I mean, in just 1 hour and few minutes, we were able to cover so many topics. I mean, as a teacher, I now know what to add in my final exam. Now I'm very clear that the students, they know a lot about these concepts. So once again, thank you so much for joining. We will be collaborating in future as well, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
All right. So if there is any piece of advice or anything as a concluding remark that you would want to share with our students before we close the session?
No, other than just be open to what you're trying to achieve. Be really open. I find that the people that get the best results, particularly in my area of work, are the people that openly, barefaced, come in and say, we have to change and we're doing this. It's when employees feel that you're sneaking around behind their back, that's when you'll get the most resistance. So I think the main thing, if you take nothing else, when you approach a transformation, just be honest and open and tell the truth. But thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, so the pleasure is all ours, and it was such at the conclusion, it was such a wonderful leadership advice. Thank you so much, Gail, once again. Thank you so much for sharing all your experience. We wish everyone in your area, in your company, for things to get well really soon, because this pandemic thing, it's affecting us all psychologically, as well as it's hampering all the different elements of our lives. So we really hope that all of us, we get through this very soon. So we will be collaborating in future as well. But for now, you have been really amazing. All the things that you shared, they were really wonderful. and I'm very happy that all of our students, they were very interactive with you. They asked questions, and I'm sure that they learned a lot as well.
Thank you very much, and good luck to everyone as well.
All right,
Okay.
thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Take care.
Ciao.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. All right, Ji, thank you so much, guys, for joining. A quick note, very quickly, okay, always encourage your class fellows to join these sessions as well. आपको पहले से प्री जजमेंट नहीं करनी कि टॉपिक क्या है क्या नहीं है. आप अपनी अवेलेबिलिटी को इंश्योर करें. यू विल फाइंड समथिंग जो आपके लिए वैल्यूएबल होगा. तो आई थिंक वी हैव अ कपल ऑफ सेशंस जो कि आइंदा हम नेक्स्ट वीक में या प्रॉब्ली आफ्टर ईद स्केड्यूल करेंगे. वी विल बी अपडेटिंग यू, बट इट ऑल डिपेंड्स कि आप उसमें कितना पार्टिसिपेट करते हैं. बट फॉर टुडे यू डिड गुड. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर कमिंग.